Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. We will just take one more minute and waiting as we admit more people into the room, and then we'll get started. Welcome. שלא ייגמר לעולם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים טבילת האדם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם. O Lord my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. Welcome all, and thank you for being here with us on this sacred day. I'm Rabbi David Fainsilber of the Jewish community of Greater Stowe, and it is my honor and privilege to be here with you and with those organizations co-sponsoring this event, our Jewish community of Greater Stowe, the Greater Stowe Interfaith Coalition, and a special thank you to Deborah Steinerman and the Vermont Holocaust Memorial. Today, we commemorate Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, as it is called in Israel, Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day. I woke up this morning deeply aware of my breath. Thank you, God, for my breath. Thank you, God, for allowing my Bubby and Zadie to survive the Shoah, the Holocaust, so that I might wake up this morning breathing. This is the second year we are meeting virtually rather than in person in this annual event. As we say in Yiddish, oi. Oi to the amount of resilience it takes to get through this pandemic that we are going through. We all feel the anxiety as we make our way through this new reality. Yet one thing that has sustained me over this time is going back in history and knowing that while what we are dealing with is difficult, it simply does not compare. Imagine the resilience it took to survive the Shoah, whether hiding in a rafter of a barn or up in an attic, or the daily reality of living in a death camp. Through the survival that was made possible even in the midst of terror and death, made possible thanks to countless acts of ordinary heroism and extraordinary heroism shown. It is awe-inducing what heroic acts ordinary people can do when faced with the despairing alternative. We think of all the ordinary people who became heroes of resistance during the Holocaust, while many, far too many, sat idly by in fear for their lives or as active accomplices to the atrocities. Many others stood up and acted courageously. And so we begin this service by lighting 12 honorary candles, 6 for the 6 million Jews whose lives were taken, 5 for the 5 million others who were taken in death camps and throughout, and 1 candle for the righteous Gentiles, the righteous heroes who helped so many survive. And we have representatives, I'll read their names, who will light these candles, but I invite you as well, if you wish to light a candle, to do so as we light together, and then a moment of silence. And so joining me in lighting are Steve Levine, Deborah Steinerman, Miriam Rosenblum, Heidi Fishman, Patty Rubin, Whitney Dykstra, and Hazel Gilmet, who have spearheaded a petition campaign to require Holocaust education in Vermont schools, as well as Lynn Altadonna, Deb Clark, Dan Noyes, and David Smith. So I invite you now to please light. If you wish to see the many lighting, you can change to gallery view so that you see everybody as we light, and then we take a moment of silence. As you are able, you rise for the El Male Rachamim prayer. El Male Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, לנשמות כל אחינו בית ישראל, וכל אלה שנטבחו בשואה, אנשים, נשים וטף, שנחנקו, ושנשרפו ושנהרגו, שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירם, בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם, אדוני הוא נחלתם. וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר אמן. A prayer for all those lives taken from us. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. I now turn it to Deborah Steinerman.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening, and thank you all for attending our annual Holocaust Remembrance Commemoration. My name is Deborah Steinerman. I'm president of the Vermont Holocaust Memorial and a JCOGS member. As a descendant of Holocaust victims, I'm keenly aware that anti-Semitism never goes away. It's one of the oldest hatreds in the world, and it's still here. Indifference during the Holocaust allowed the evil few to accomplish something that nobody could have imagined. We're the last generation to have had the privilege of learning about the Holocaust from survivors and liberators. As distance from the Holocaust increases, the obligation for a day of remembrance is more relevant than ever before. In 1951, the Israeli legislature designated the 27th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan as its day for remembering and commemorating. That day, today's date, was named Yom Hashoah v'Hagavura, Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day, to emphasize the bravery of the time, not just the destruction. We remember those who were killed, but we also remember the heroic acts taken at that time. Holocaust commemoration has evolved from victimhood to bravery, heroism, and survival. However, recent surveys show that millennials and Gen Z know shockingly little about the Holocaust. Through social media, Holocaust denial and distortion, alongside many other forms of online hate, has thrived. Now, more than ever, we need to share the warnings from the Holocaust with our youth so it does not happen again to any group of people. It's our obligation to ensure the accuracy of information and instruction on the Holocaust. The Holocaust is not ancient history. The same poisons of racism and anti-Semitism that led to the mass murder of millions are at work today. The danger of its recurrence in the future can be mitigated, but only if we enhance understanding of what occurred in the past. This is why the Vermont Holocaust Memorial was launched. VTHM is the only Holocaust memorial in this state. We are a museum without walls, created for the need to educate. We supplement teachers' Holocaust and genocide lesson plans, lessons which are so relevant again today. Last fall, VTHM concluded our first student essay contest entitled Rescuers in the Time of COVID-19. We presented the top essayists in 4 grade categories with cash awards. We're now working alongside students, teachers, and Vermont legislators to advance a bill requiring Holocaust and genocide education in our schools. But we're a very small organization and can't do it alone. Honored to light candles this evening were Whitney Dykstra and Hazel Gilmet, 2 8th grade students who experienced VTHM co-founder Miriam Rosenblum's family story of survival when she spoke to their grade at Bristol's Mount Abraham Union Middle School earlier this year. These young ladies were so moved by Miriam's account, they started a petition to require Holocaust education in all Vermont schools that has already garnered over 550 signatures. We hope you sign their petition and help bring about this legislation. Please visit our website or contact me to learn more. We'll post the link to the website and the petition in the chat. Tonight, we honor and remember the rescuers in the time of the Holocaust. Together, we can make sure the memory and lessons of Holocaust victims, survivors, and heroes are never forgotten. I'd like to thank Rabbi Fainsilber, JCOGS President Stephen Levine, members of the Stowe Interfaith Coalition, and our honored memorial candlelighters for partaking in this commemorative gathering. A special thanks to JCOGS member Patty Rubin, chair of the Stowe Interfaith Coalition, who will now be introducing our presenters. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Debbie. Our first reader, Steve Levine, President, Jewish Community of Greater Stowe. Needs to be unmuted.
Can't hear you, Steve. No, we can't hear you. Let's try.
Yeah.
Yep. Steve, are you there? So, Patty or Debbie, would you do the reading?
I can do it.
I can, okay, Patty, go ahead.
Throughout the year, we remember how death sought the exile and annihilation of the Jewish people. At Passover, we tell of Pharaoh. At Hanukkah, at Purim of Haman, at Yom Hashoah of Hitler. We speak of past oppressors, hoping that through awareness we may prevent future tyrants from attaining power. Nevertheless, we also give thanks for those in every generation who came forward to lead our people out of the darkness. We recognize heroic rescuers from every generation, hoping that the memory of their strength will fortify us if confronted with similar evil. While we commemorate the heroes of the past, we also remember modern heroes who saved Jews from the Holocaust. During that dark time, there were those who had the courage to care, non-Jews who risked their lives and often the lives of their families to save Jews from death. The Talmud states, whoever saves a single life is as if one saves the entire world. Just as we tell of Moses leading our people to freedom, we must also tell of contemporary heroes and how they helped save Jews just 76 years ago. On this Yom Hashoah, gathering of Holocaust commemoration, we remember the rescuers. Our second reader, Reverend Peter Hammond from Stowe Community Church.
We tell the story of Irina Sendler, who worked with the Polish underground to help Jews in hiding. As a healthcare worker, she had access to the Warsaw Ghetto and led hundreds of Jewish children out of the ghetto to safe hiding places. between 1942 and 1943. Some children were carried out in potato sacks. Others were placed alongside the dead in coffins. Despite being arrested, imprisoned, and tortured, Irina's spirit would not be broken. She was saved when rescued by members of the underground who aided in her escape. Her courage enabled not only the survival of hundreds of Jewish children, but also the generations of their descendants.
We recount the story of the Vesely family, a Muslim family from Albania, who gave shelter to two Jewish families. From November 1943 until liberation, the Vesely family sheltered the Mandil and the Ben Joseph families in a small room above their barn. While the adults had to remain hidden, their children dressed as Muslim villagers, allowing them to live openly. Despite the many hardships, the entire Vesely family took care of the daily needs of the Jews they were hiding. Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Authority, recognized the entire Vesely family as righteous Gentiles.
Thank you, Father Joseph. The next reader, Jack Wall, representing United Universalist Fellowship in Stowe.
We relate the story of Martha and Waitzel Sharp, Americans who volunteered to travel as representatives of the Unitarian Church. The American Unitarian Association, AUA, was alarmed by the increasing number of Jews, political dissidents, and other refugees seeking help from the Unitarian Church. The AUA selected Reverend Waitzel Sharp, a young minister from Massachusetts, and his wife Martha, an experienced social worker, to oversee their newly formed Commission for Service program. The Sharps engaged in both direct relief and immigration assistance, often focusing on individual cases, many of whom were Jews. In May 1940, the Sharps opened offices in neutral Portugal and in Marseille, part of the Vichy, France. On one occasion, the Sharps battled numerous bureaucracies to secure exit visas, transit permits, and identity papers for 29 children to leave Vichy, France. They managed to get them across the French border to Spain, then on to Portugal, and onto a boat to the US. One of those children was Jewish 14-year-old Eva Fengel, who remembers arriving at the port of New York on December 23rd, 1940, and seeing Martha Sharp there at the dock to meet them. Let the story of Martha and Waitzel Sharp inspire us to do right when faced with evil.
Thank you, Jack. Our next reader, Jim Shirkalis, representing the Baha'i Faith.
Please, Jim, please unmute yourself.
Thank you.
There you go.
I'm sorry. We share the story of Alexander Rosalind, who in 1943 volunteered to help hide three boys, Jacob, Shalom, and David Gutgeld, who were left alone in the Warsaw Ghetto after their mother died and their father was in a Russian labor camp. People caught harboring Jews from the Nazis were subject to death themselves. Despite that risk to himself and his family, Alexander helped smuggle the boys out of the ghetto. When two of the boys became ill with scarlet fever, he snuck them into a hospital under false identities. Although Shalom died, Jacob and David remained with the Rosalind family until liberation. Alexander's courage and commitment saved the lives of these two Jewish boys and their future descendants.
Thank you, Jim. Our next reader is Father Rick Swanson, representing St. John's in the Mountains Episcopal Church.
Hold on. We convey a story of Master Sergeant Rodney Edmonds, an American soldier. During the Battle of the Bulge on December 19th, 1944, Edmonds was captured and sent to a German POW camp. As Germany's defeat was clearly approaching, the camp commandant ordered Edmonds, the senior U.S. officer, to instruct only the Jewish American POW soldiers to present themselves at the next morning's assembly so that they could be separated from the other prisoners. Instead, Edmonds ordered all 1,275 POWs to assemble outside their barracks. The German commandant rushed to Edmonds in a fury, placed a pistol against Edmonds' head, and demanded that he identify the Jewish soldiers under his command. Instead, Edmonds responded, "We are all Jews here," and told the commandant that if he wanted to shoot the Jews, he would have to shoot all the prisoners. He then warned the commandant that if he harmed any of Edmonds' men, the commandant would be prosecuted for war crimes, since the Geneva Convention required prisoners to only give their name, rank, and serial number. Religion was not required. The commandant backed down and left. Edmonds saved the lives of 200 Jewish GIs that day. Let the story of Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds inspire us to stand up when faced with evil.
Thank you. Thank you, Father. Our keynote speaker this evening is author Kay Heidi Fishman. Heidi won the 2015 Joseph Zola Memorial Holocaust Educator Award from the Maurice Greenberg Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Hartford for the book proposal that led to her debut novel, Today's Promise. Heidi, who grew up in Connecticut and skiing Mount Mansfield, now lives in Norwich, Vermont. After graduating from Williams College, she received her MA and doctorate in education and counseling psychology from Western Michigan University. As a psychologist, she specialized in working with people with eating disorders and histories of trauma at both Dartmouth College and in private practice. Heidi regularly presents the lessons from her mother's story of Holocaust survival and shares her genealogy research experience with students and communities throughout the United States. Kay Heidi Fishman is on the board of the Vermont Holocaust Memorial and a lecturer in their Speakers Bureau. Please feel free to type any questions you may have in the Zoom chat box. And if there is time at the end of our program, Heidi will be glad to respond. I take great pleasure in introducing Kay Heidi Fishman.
Thank you, Patty. What a nice introduction. As a child, I grew up knowing that my mother and my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They didn't talk about it, but they didn't avoid it either. Basically, if I asked a question, which I rarely did, they would answer it, and then the conversation would move on to something else. The fact that they were survivors was just a fact. It was just part of their past, like they were German or they used to ski. It was supposed to be a no big deal conversation in the house. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. Our family belonged to Congregation Beth El, a Reform temple. And in the winter, my father would pull us out of Sunday school so we could go skiing in Stowe. My Judaic education was definitely lacking. In 2012, I decided to jump into studying the Holocaust because I wanted to record the family story. And I knew in my bones that there was something very, very important there. As I researched, I discovered things that I hadn't learned in school, things that I did not put together earlier, and even things that my mother did not know about her own survival. The Lichtenstern family fled from Cologne to Amsterdam in 1936, when my mother was only 9 months old. They thought Holland would be safe, but by war's end, 75% of the Jews in the Netherlands were dead. I have come to understand that nobody survived without help. Every survivor has a story of somebody passing them food, hiding them, giving them false papers, or offering hope. And while it is extremely important that we remember the victims, the innocent men, women, and children who were murdered simply because they were Jewish, today I want to talk about rescuers. As I look at the world now, there are so many people who need help, who need rescue, people who have trouble getting through today, 2021. And I wonder how many of us can be the helpers. How many of us are willing to go the extra mile? As we remember the past and the loss of our people, can we be motivated to make the world better in the future for all people? So let me introduce you to some of the people who helped save my mother and her family. I'm just going to do a little screen sharing here. I hope people can see the screen. I'm sure somebody will tell me if you can't. Okay. First, there was Adela and Bobby Klopfer. Friends of my grandparents, they were in a mixed marriage, and they hid the family in their apartment building's attic storage room. They had to do everything for the family: get food, prepare it, provide entertainment for a 5- and 7-year-old so they would be quiet and the neighbors wouldn't hear, and even let them know when it was safe to flush a toilet. If they had been caught, they would have been sent to the camps themselves. This is a picture of the room in that attic. And this is a picture of my mother, Tootie, and her brother, Robbie, from 1943 when they were hiding in that attic. Then when the family left their hiding place, there was my grandfather's friend, Egbert de Jong. My grandfather had entrusted him with his life savings, or actually what was left of it after the Germans took 65% of his assets as an emigration tax when they left Germany in 1936. My grandfather told Egbert to use the money, if he could, to help them in any way. False papers, bribery, it didn't matter. Go ahead, use the money. And Egbert did. He managed to help the family get a falsified passport saying that they were from Paraguay. There were the people who created the falsified passport. A group of Polish diplomats in Bern, Switzerland, who are working in tandem with the Jewish leaders of both Zionist and Orthodox organizations. They were raising funds, buying blank passports from South American consuls, getting information about the Jews in peril, their names, their birth dates, their relationships to each other, and getting their pictures, and then creating these passports, going back to the consuls that they had previously bribed for signatures and stamps. There was Ignaz Herzfeld, a notary in Basel, Switzerland. He signed an attestation of a copy of a passport saying that this was true and valid. So the passport that was created for my grandfather and the family was copied and then notarized. And then this copy of the copied passport and the notarization went to my grandfather. The original passport, the location of that is still unknown. Somebody had to bring these false papers to the Jews in the ghettos and the transit camps. I'm not sure who did this for my grandparents. I wonder who smuggled the papers out of Switzerland through Germany or France and into Holland. It may have been the secretary of this man, Jakob Jorisch. He was in Basel. He was a business associate of my grandfather. I have not been able to get enough definitive information to prove this family lore story that is out there. Then there were the Jews who helped each other. When my mother's family was sent to Westerbork, the transit camp in Eastern Holland, my grandfather became a rescuer. He and his former work colleagues, Leopold Oberlander and Joseph Sachs, helped to convert the transit camp into a work camp. They arranged for scrap metal to be brought to the camp for sorting. Being useful to the Germans meant staying in the Netherlands. Staying in the Netherlands meant staying alive at least a little longer. At one point, there were 1,200 Jews that were working to sort scrap metal, and that was 1,200 not being sent east to the death camps. My grandfather was allowed to leave the camp as part of the scrap metal business. He was sent to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague to find more metal to be shipped to the camp. He would go, he'd get the metal or make the arrangements for the metal, which would then go to the camp, and the Jews were put to work separating it again. On these trips, he bought extra food and supplies for his family and friends. And he even managed to buy a doll for my mother and gave it to her for her 9th birthday. While I was doing research, I discovered something that I found incredibly touching. My grandfather's friends, Gertie and Mao Hahnemann, had left their daughter, who was an infant at the time, Ineke, in hiding with the Gentile family. My grandfather, on his trips into town, would check on the child whenever he could and bring news of her safety back to the worried parents. Gertie wrote about this in her diaries. After 9 months in Westerbork, my mother, her brother, and her parents were sent to Theresienstadt. They were in one of the cattle cars that was packed with terrified and despondent people who didn't know what was coming next. The trip took a couple of days, and my mother has a clear memory of sitting near Max Ehrlich on that trip. Max and his wife Lotta were friends of my grandparents, and Max was a famous German comedian and film star. He spent many hours during that frightening trip singing songs and telling jokes, trying to lift the spirits of his fellow Jews. In Theresienstadt, life was much harder than Westerbork. While it was considered a privileged camp and was used to fool the International Red Cross into thinking that the German camps were humane, it was actually a place where people were suffering. Between 33 and 35 inmates died of starvation and succumbed to disease in the lice and rat-infested, overcrowded barracks. Everyone over the age of 9 was put to work. My grandfather was lucky enough to be assigned to work in the root cellar. There he was tasked with separating rotten vegetables from edible ones. The rotten ones would be used for the watery soup given to the Jews, and the good vegetables were saved for the SS who guarded the camp. The guard in charge of supervising my grandfather was someone he knew from life before the war. This Nazi had been the head waiter at a Berlin restaurant, and my grandfather had dined at that restaurant frequently, and he was a generous tipper. He liked good service, so he gave good tips. Here in Theresienstadt, the roles were reversed, and it was the guard who allowed my grandfather to have something extra. He allowed him to steal food. I imagine the scene as the guard saying, "I'm going to have a cigarette. I'll be back in 15 minutes," and leaving the room with a wink. And then my grandfather would tuck the bottom of his ski pants, which is what he had on that winter when he took with him to the camp, into his boots, and he'd stuff the pants legs full of vegetables and run over to the barracks where my grandmother was with the children. Every little bit of extra nourishment helped. In late September 1944, the Nazis began liquidating Theresienstadt, and they were sending as many Jews east as possible. Over the course of 1 month, there were no less than 11 transports with over 17,000 people sent to Auschwitz. When my grandfather was assigned to one of those transports, and was waiting in line to be sent to Auschwitz, he was in shock. He had been separated from his wife, his parents, his children. He was being sent to his death, and he was fully aware of that. A friend of his, I don't know who, but someone else who was also in that line of death, reminded him that he had a Paraguayan passport. Now is the time to use it. What's the worst that can happen? My grandfather did show his false passport to a German, and he was released from that transport to Auschwitz. My grandfather returned to his family, and they stayed in Theresienstadt until the end of the war. And of course, the friend who pushed him to step out of line and save himself, he was sent to the gas chambers. Death was all around her, yet my mother doesn't remember death. She doesn't remember fear or hunger. What she remembers is that her mother was always there taking care of her. My grandmother had a mission to protect her children, to keep them fed and clean and make sure that they felt safe enough to not be emotionally damaged by their ordeal. And in large part, she succeeded. In May 1945, the surviving inmates of Theresienstadt were as scared of their Russian liberators as they were of their Nazi captors, because the Russians had reputations of doing horrible things. But these Russian soldiers, they were kind and they handed out food generously. And I have another slide. There it goes. Getting home after liberation was difficult. The journey was long and full of stops and starts. My mother remembers a stop in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, which was then held by General Patton's troops. The family was there for only a few days. They met 2 American soldiers, and one was named Lloyd Miller. My mother has forgotten the name of the other soldier. These kind young men took the family under their wing. My mother remembers chocolate and chewing gum and cartoons. For the first time in several years, they were treated with respect and kindness. At almost 10 years old, my mother developed a crush on the handsome Sergeant Miller. After the war, there were about 8 million people who had been displaced from their homes for one reason or another. Displaced persons camps were created, and there were many Holocaust survivors who spent years in these camps. Some people didn't want to go back to the anti-Semitism of their original home villages. Others simply had no home to return to, as it had been destroyed. And then there was the problem that many countries did not want to accept stateless refugees. Holland was not interested in hosting hundreds and thousands of penniless Jewish survivors, and they actually set a quota of a total of 8,000. My mother's family's DP registration cards have the word stateless crossed out and replaced with the word Paraguay. My hypothesis is that if they had been, let me back that up, they were able to get into the Amsterdam and Holland as Paraguayan refugees much faster than as stateless displaced persons. And I wonder why they didn't write Paraguay in the first place. Were they being honest and someone then pushed them to use that false passport again? They did manage to get home in less than 2 months. When they did get back to Amsterdam, their apartment was occupied by somebody else. They had nowhere to go. My grandfather had knocked on a door of a friend. Robert Koch was a business acquaintance whom my grandfather had entrusted with many of the family's valuables at the start of the war. Koch had been asked to hold my grandmother's fur coat, the silverware, art, the piano. And when my grandfather knocked and asked if the family could stay a few nights, Koch made an excuse, a dinner party or something, and he slammed the door in my grandfather's face. He had been a Nazi collaborator and happily sold my grandparents' possessions, never expecting to see them again. But there were others in Amsterdam who were upstanders. A woman named Mrs. Muller agreed to rent the family a room in her house for a very reasonable sum. And my mother's former nanny returned a box of photographs and mementos. And Egbert de Jong, who my grandfather had given all that money to, he returned the balance of the money my grandfather had entrusted with him, along with a full accounting of what was spent. From 1933 through 1945, there were an infinite number of decisions made by millions and millions of people. Some of those decisions were nothing less than evil. Many were cruel and based on hate. Still others were the types of moral dilemmas that nobody ever wants to face. Do I save this life or that life? There were people who chose to lead a quiet life and ignore the turmoil and cruelty around them. And then there were those who found themselves in a position where they could help. Some helped loved ones, some helped acquaintances, others helped total strangers. For some, doing the right thing was easy, and for others, it took immense strength. It took courage. Some were never in danger, others risked everything. So today, as we remember the 6 million victims, I would also like to remember the upstanders who helped. And as we remember, I also wonder if we can act. Can we, you, me, this small congregation in a small rural state, ordinary people, can we help someone in need? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. That was incredibly moving presentation. So appreciate your time and effort and all the all of the research and devotion to that story that you've brought to light for all of us. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So we're now going to say the mourner's Kaddish prayer. And I invite you, for those saying it, to rise. This is the memorial prayer that is said for those who have passed. So we lift up their lives. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon uvyomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yahei shmei Rabbah mevorach la'olam almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudsha berichu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shalom Rabbah min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru Amen. May their memories be for a blessing. So we will end with this song, Chai, Alive, by Ofra Chaza, Israeli singer and songwriter. This is a song about life and living, and the Jewish word that you may be familiar with from the word lechaim, when we say cheers, meaning to life, the word chai. Again, I want to thank all of the candle lighters, all of the readers, and our co-sponsors, Vermont Holocaust Memorial, Greater Stowe Interfaith Coalition, and JCOGS. And thank you, Heidi, so much for those incredible words. Please join me in singing. Listen, my friends, I'm still alive, and my two eyes are raised towards the light. Many my thorns, but to my flowers ahead of me are years too great to count. I truly ask, and I do pray. It is good that hope is not yet lost. A psalm does pass through generations, like spring that came then to eternity. I truly ask, and I do pray. It is good that hope is not yet lost. Chai, 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 yes, I'm still alive. Here's the song of Saba, sung before to Abba, and today ani od chai, 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 Am Yisrael chai. Here's the song of Savta, sang before to Ima, and today ani. Thank you all for joining us on this most holy day. Blessings and safety on the journey.